The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. Horrific internet images and headlines documenting both the brutality and battlefield success of the so-called Islamic State terrorist group have shocked the world. Their capacity to recruit followers from half a world away has raised fears of acts of terror in our own communities. As a U.S.-led coalition struggles to gain traction against this new contender for leadership in the region, we'll look at policy decisions that shape the environment from which they sprang and strategies for responding to the dangers they pose to governments and peoples in the Middle East and beyond. Our guest has lived and worked in the Muslim world for nearly 2 decades. Graham Fuller is former vice chairman of the National Intelligence Council at the CIA, a former senior political scientist at RAND, and a current adjunct professor of history at Simon Fraser University. He's the author of numerous books about the Middle East, including The Future of Political Islam and the Amazon bestseller, Turkey and the Arab Spring. Graham Fuller, welcome to Milwaukee and International Focus.
Thank you, Doug. Delighted to be here.
Well, I'm wondering if you could just sort of set the stage and describe the situation on the ground right now in terms of the territory that's being held, the coalition that's trying to oppose ISIS or ISIL or the Islamic State.
Yeah, I prefer the term. I don't like to dignify this whole phenomenon with the term Islamic State because it suggests that this is what an Islamic State is really all about. So let's say ISIS maybe. I think really the present situation is a kind of culmination of the disastrous military conflicts that Iraq has suffered, indeed the U.S. has suffered, over the past decade or more. In a way, it shouldn't be surprising at all that we should see such a really radical, violent, horrendous even response as people respond to a 10-year war in Iraq, the killing of 500,000 to 1 million Iraqis and the displacement of 2 or 3 million others and the total destruction of the infrastructure and the turning of the entire political system topsy-turvy. So, and a scrabble for power under as yet unwritten rules. So in this sense, I think it's not surprising that we would find some kind of truly radical phenomenon that attracts people who are truly unhappy for a variety of reasons, attract them to a violent and let's say almost apocalyptic kind of vision.
Well, you know, in some ways, this is sort of the second coming of this particular franchise, if you will. Under Mr. Zarqawi, there was a precursor group, and much of the success that the people opposed to them really enjoyed came both with the U.S. surge in Iraq, but also, I think, significantly, the winning over of the tribal leadership in Iraq. And the sort of quid pro quo was, yes, indeed, help us defeat these bad guys, and there'll be a much more substantive role for you in the new government. Now, how did that work out under Mr. al-Maliki?
Well, as you know, part of the problem was that after the Shiites, who deservedly did win elections, I mean, they represent the majority of the country, proceeded then to rather narrowly define the interests of the Iraqi state and exclude all kinds of Sunnis and Sunni elites that had been part of the earlier system of Saddam. It was an ugly system under Saddam, but nonetheless, not everyone should have been tarred with the Ba'athi brush and expelled from authority. So I think a lot of this has been a reaction, well, first of all, in Iraq, a reaction to 10 years of occupation, U.S. military occupation, and the destruction of the country. Secondly, Ba'athist figures who had been, I mean, you couldn't be anybody in the Iraqi government.
It was a union card, essentially.
Yeah, basically, you had to be a member of the Ba'ath Party. So in our wisdom, we proceeded to throw out anybody who had had anything to do with the Ba'ath Party. So a lot of them, not just even civilians, but military officers with military skills, all finally decided that they too might join these organizations. You had Sunni tribes that were very angry with one thing or another. So I think the present phenomenon represents the dimensions of dissatisfaction with what has happened in Iraq from many different perspectives. And for that reason, it's not going to go away quite that easily.
Well, and again, whereas previously we were able to enlist some of the traditional leadership of the Sunni community against what was perceived as a common threat, I think that's going to be a lot harder now, will it not? I mean, because they felt like, well, okay, we tried that and we were locked out when we thought we were going to have a role in this government.
That's true, and to put it more crudely in another way, we rented them really for the interim rather than truly buying their loyalty. I mean, very few people will be loyal to a foreign occupying power, much less a non-Muslim occupying foreign power. So I think the difficulty, in one sense, I don't feel desperately depressed about the situation, which is awful at the very moment. But I don't really see this as a particularly viable combination of forces. There's some more mild Islamists who felt that this was the only way to go. Some extremely radical, violent ones who I think horrify even most Muslims who don't perceive this as the way an Islamic government or governance should operate. Secularists, tribal types, all of whom I think are going to have a serious falling out sooner or later with this kind of unskilled and quite ruthless regime. But in the meantime, it's a true challenge, and the most scary part is not the long run, I think, power of this movement, which I think will not be significant, but whether in its verve, its élan, it can somehow overrun a number of cities in the very short term, which would then be very hard to recoup later on.
Well, talk a little bit about that sort of indigenous capacity to resist on the part of the new government in Iraq. I mean, you know, we've spent a lot of blood and treasure trying to stand up a viable Iraqi security force. What is the state of that?
Well, you know, you don't establish these institutions overnight, especially, I mean, the whole book, the Iraqi structure, power structure, is utterly eliminated. So it's as if you have to start rewriting constitutions and the rules of the game and the laws that were unknown and are still being explored. So that's hard. I think I'm mildly encouraged that with the departure of Maliki, who was democratically elected but happened not to be very good, at least in this respect, I'm a little mildly encouraged that the new prime minister should be well aware of the shortcomings of his predecessor and knows that he's got to bring more Sunnis into government, and a feeling that they too are part of this new structure, and that it's not simply a new Shiite structure. That may, with luck, that may happen. But I think it's going to be quite a while before an Iraqi army worthy of the name is going to be trained up. I suspect most likely it's going to be tribal forces that just will be fed up, disillusioned, angered with the rather high-handed, brutal, probably not very competent administrative abilities of ISIS, which suggests that it's a state, but I don't really think is.
Well, let's take a quick swing around the region and talk about the reaction on the part of the neighbors, beginning with some of the Gulf states. I mean, that's a interesting relationship there, because there's been sort of suggestions that certainly people within the country, if not the government itself, were not too sad to see some sort of Islamist forces prevailing. But now We've heard sort of the official line from Riyadh and other places that, you know, this is a common enemy that threatens us all. So where do they stand on this right now?
Well, Saudi Arabia has played a very risky game for quite some time, particularly Saudi Arabia, not uniquely. Kuwait and United Arab Emirates, among others, have even the state of Qatar. The Saudis, though, really specialize in what was called checkbook diplomacy. And if they saw a real ideological threat to them, they'd whip out a checkbook and support the movements on the understanding that you don't touch Saudi Arabia. You know, do whatever you do, but don't touch us. I think that has begun to run out. The time has run out on them in that regard. But there are a lot of Saudis, a lot of people in the Gulf, a lot of people in the Middle East who are very angry about the U.S. Not just even recently, but going back to undying U.S. Total support for the state of Israel vis-a-vis Palestinians, U.S. support for dictatorships across the region, who are not altogether unhappy to see the U.S. get a bloody nose or more in this struggle. So they're, on the one hand, buying off some of these people. On the other hand, they also don't, the Saudis in particular, ideologically hate Shiites, so they see this as a way to get back at the Shiite government that really shouldn't be there in Iraq. It really should be Sunni. A mixture of emotions that has led them very unwisely to bankroll this particular group. I think they now understand that, and the U.S. has leaned on them furthermore. But it's a bit late in the game now.
So you touched on this a little bit, sort of the Sunni-Shia divide in the region, and we've got just about a minute before our break, but what about the love that dare not speak its name, the convergence of interest between the U.S. and Iran in this conflict?
Well, just let me say a couple of words, if I might, Doug, about the Shiite-Sunni thing. I think this is often presented as some kind of eternal division in the Arab world, and this is what drives absolutely everything. That's not really the case. Yes, there are Shiites and Sunnis. The religious differences are minor. The major quarrels, if you will, is often between simply disparate communities who have competed for power, ideology and religion quite aside. So I don't think it has to be a driving force forever. But in the meantime, Saudi Arabia simply is very nervous about Iran, has been forever. It's not about nuclear weapons. They just share the Persian Gulf with the area, with Iran, and they're trying to weaken Iran wherever they can. They're doing it, unfortunately, in the name of Shiism, which is opposing Shiism, which I think is a dangerous game. It's more geopolitics.
Well, and yeah, that's often the case. I mean, during the Troubles in Ireland, the Catholics and the Protestants were not fighting about the doctrine of transubstantiation or something. It was just a marker for each community. So, exactly. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the ostensible ideology of ISIS when we come back, but first we'll take a short break. We'll be right back with more International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're discussing the challenge of ISIS with Graham Fuller. Well, let's talk a little bit about the appeal that ISIS has. Now, they have, for those who are not faint of heart, you can actually go online and see their very, very slickly produced online magazine called Dabik, which is the name of a town in northern Syria that figures prominently in sort of the eschatology of Islam. It's basically the Armageddon, where this climactic battle between Muslims and non-Muslims is to take place. And interestingly enough, 2012 Pew survey in Iraq found that 72% of respondents believe that they would witness that sort of end time in their lifetime. And do you think that plays into this all? I mean, are they hitting the right note for a population that thinks, yeah, maybe we are at the end of history?
You know, I think if that same poll had been taken 15 years ago, there wouldn't have been a flicker of that kind of belief. But when you lived under war and chaos and watched city after city be destroyed, infrastructures destroyed, massive killings of all kinds, vengeance and tribal and sectarian and all kinds of things, I think you get very much in a kind of end of the world state of mind that obviously is one of the things that the ISIS is trading off of. I don't think that's the way Muslims really think, who walk around in normal countries day to day, that they are about to witness Armageddon.
Right. Well, and
but there are other reasons for powerful apocalyptic appeal on the part of ISIS.
Well, and another aspect of their message, if you will, is one that really has been a strain running through the Muslim world really since the end of the Ottoman Empire, that, you know, what is the appropriate and effective form of government that the Muslim polity, however you perceive it, should take. And the ISIS leadership has said, okay, you've tried various strains of secular government. You know, you've had Nasser's pan-Arabism, you've had monarchies, you've had republics. Look where they've gotten you. Now here we are, hearkening back to this golden age, and that's what our enterprise is really about, and don't you want to be part of that? And that's a pretty compelling argument, isn't it?
Well, it is a compelling argument, and you suggest going back to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and as you know, most of the boundaries of the Arab world at that time were highly artificially drawn at the convenience of what served French and British competing French and British colonial interests in the area. So it doesn't really represent boundaries that are always traditional in any sense. So one of the really appealing things that ISIS is saying, hey, we are about to repeal these arguments, these boundaries that were set by imperialists 50, 70 years ago, and we have now erased the border between Iraq and Syria, which is artificial, to, I think, a region, to a Muslim world that has felt that it's been on the receiving end of Western power for a very long time. And I'm not just talking about the U.S. in Iraq or Afghanistan, but colonial intervention and this kind of thing for a very long time. There's something very appealing that you're going to roll the clock back to an age in which we were not beholden to these earlier traditional colonial forces. It appeals to those who think this may be the dawn of a new age. Okay, yes, it's brutal, but the dawn of any revolution can be brutal. This is some of much of the appeal of this, and I think even to younger Muslims, sadly, even those in the West that maybe don't feel that they've really been fully integrated into Western society and life, and that this is now the moment and the cause. I don't think it'll take very long for them living there under these realities to begin to wise up and realize that this is not the promised kingdom at all, and become very bitterly disillusioned. But in the meantime, there they are, just sort of acting out against a whole range of grievances that the Middle East has had against Western policies over a long period of time.
Well, and none other than Osama bin Laden observed at one point, if you see a strong horse and a weak horse, people are drawn to the strong horse. And so, to the extent that the chaotic situation in both Iraq and Syria have really allowed them a certain degree of battlefield success, do you think that contributes to it? And it's like, look, they're winning. You know, is that sort of
sure? Yeah, they certainly are winning for now. I think this has been quite astonishing. I would say almost artificial in the sense, as I said earlier, I don't think this is going to last for a very long time, but it certainly commanded attention. And if the U.S. had its form of shock and awe of thousands of Patriot missiles going into Baghdad on the night of the attack. These beheadings, for sure, are another form of shock and awe. You really wonder, if the ISIS had simply been out there mowing down people in battles, pitched battles in the field, whether they would have hardly had a flicker on Western media. But boy, 3 live beheadings galvanizes the world and really brought the results that I think ISIS wanted. In other words, we want the front confrontation here and now, and this is us, and it's for real.
Well, and that brings the point of just this very slick media machine, which I think is somewhat a new thing among these kinds of groups. I mean, they have a very strong social media presence, and it's frankly very well done. I mean, in terms of just messaging. And so, you touched on this before. I mean, how do you think that is having the impact it's having on someone in Ottawa, Canada, who's decided he wants to become part of this jihad?
Well, as you know, I mean, in the case in Ottawa and another case in Quebec province, these people were really not associated in any way with any broader movement. They were kind of loners and very much at odds with society, or had criminal backgrounds or drugs or all kinds. So I think often, traditionally, people who are not succeeding in society look to movements like this to find a sense of fulfillment and meaning in their lives. So one can understand the appeal, but if you're living in the area and have been through the deprivations that war brings, or if you look at the situation of Palestinians still under occupation for so long, 30, 40, 50 years, you can understand how the emotions are a bit more plugged in to genuine movements. But I think one thing is really very important here, Doug, and that is the wisdom of constant American intervention, especially military intervention. As I think the region has been deprived of the opportunity, in effect, to learn to run itself. It's been the U.S. constantly intervening, checking, changing, not according to what people of the region necessarily want, but according to what they think is wise. And these countries are never going to grow up politically when they're denied or don't have the opportunity, either through their own dictators or foreign intervention, to take charge of their own systems and learn through, yes, mistakes, failures. Of course they will be there, but if you aren't given that chance to fail, what are you going to learn? When are you going to wise up and realize that some apocalyptic language isn't really the answer to your problems?
So what about just the economic viability of this entity as it tries to consolidate control over territory? I mean, there was a time when much was made of wealthy, like-minded donors from the Gulf and elsewhere. But now the oil revenues are estimated at about $1 million a day from territory they control. I mean, is that complicating the situation?
It must. I mean, it obviously means it's not going to collapse economically, and furthermore, it means that they can afford to pay significant people or professional people to continue to participate in a game like this. But in the end, does this represent the trappings of a true state? I mean, this is out in the middle of nowhere, if you will. They don't control, well, Mosul is a significant city, but otherwise, this is far from capital cities, and I would argue it's going to be very hard for them to maintain themselves as a credible state for delivering a whole range of services and integrate. I mean, a state has ultimately got to integrate itself into the neighborhood, and I don't think they can. They've got, in effect, enemies on all sides. And that's one of the reasons I just don't think they have a terribly bright future ahead of them. But the short term could still be very ugly.
Well, if the phone rings tomorrow and you're summoned to the Oval Office for consultation, what do you think the best approach is? Sort of a containment philosophy? Or?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a containment philosophy. After having watched so many of these debacles and U.S. getting involved and coming out worse, the U.S. has come out worse, the region has come out worse in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Iraq and elsewhere. I just don't think that a powerful military is the key to very complex political and social problems. And furthermore, the region has to do it by itself, as I said, and not the U.S. I've been, well, frankly, shocked at the speed that ISIS was able to move so swiftly, to the point that whereas I felt U.S. should not get involved in this, I yielded to the extent of saying, yes, they cannot be allowed to take Baghdad. They cannot be allowed to take Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, or Damascus, or something like that. But that's probably not in the cards. And let's try to limit them, keep them in a box, and have to cope there. But I hope, in the end, I want to see the peoples of the region, solve this thing. And there's a state like Turkey, extremely important and strong state. Iraq itself and its Shiite army, which hopefully will look more like an all Iraqi army. Other states in the region that will contribute to boxing this in. But let's not forget, this is a symptom of real trouble in the area, and we may be able to smash this immediate symptom, but the original causes go way back and have not been dealt with, and therefore every new iteration is more fearsome.
Well, Graham Fuller, thank you very much. We'll have to leave it at that. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,